So let's take a look at textures, forms, and styles. The narrative style here. Now, this is called a limited third person narrator. Third person, you know what that is. The perspective is limited. And this means that we only know what one person is thinking and feeling, and that is Dorian. Okay, if you know what all of the characters are thinking, that's called an omniscient third person narrator. In this case, it's a limited third person narrator. The next question, what do we learn about Dorian? Well, from the other characters, we learn that Dorian Gray is very young and beautiful. Through the narrator, we learn that Dorian Gray is a very fragile person who suffers a lot. He's very sensitive and introspective. Now, through Dorian's own words, we learn that he is very vain, vanitoso. He's frightened of growing old and losing his beauty. This implies that he's quite shallow also, indica un po' di superficialità. The next question asks you to reflect on the double revelation that strikes Dorian. So the double revelation means that two things happen. Okay, at first, Dorian sees the painting and he's very pleased by it. The painting is beautiful, and everyone says it looks exactly like him, so he is beautiful. The painting has captured his beauty at the moment when Basil painted it. So the painting will remain beautiful and will not age, whereas Dorian himself will grow old and decay with the passage of time. Dorian becomes very anxious with these revelations. Now I'm curious, can you think of another author who wrote about the passing of time and how to memorialize youth in art? Well, Shakespeare in his sonnets, especially sonnet number 130, dedicated to the young man. Okay, he says that the young man shall grow old, but he will remain and live on in the sonnet. So the qualities that Dorian Gray is afraid to lose are the smooth skin on his face, his beautiful eyes, and the grace of his figure. With age, his red lips and his blonde hair will fade. Then you're asked to find some literary devices. Well, the simile to describe Dorian's pain. As he thought of it, a sharp pain struck through him like a knife. A metaphor used to describe his eyes. His eyes deepened into amethyst. They became very dark. And a simile used to describe his feelings. Well, he felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. You can imagine that. So this passage is very descriptive. The limited third-person narrative allows us to know what Dorian is thinking, and we realize that he is very sensitive. However, to his friends, he appears vain and superficial, and there are rhetorical devices, as we just mentioned, and they describe his feelings and his appearance. So if we look at the main principles contained in the preface to the picture of Dorian Gray, I would say that there are four that you should underline as being important. The first one, an artist should create beautiful things and not, push a certain message. By the way, for the people who simply cut and pasted the whole preface, it's not enough. You have to understand it and be able to explain it in your own words. So the first important one, an artist should create beautiful things. The second one is that the artist himself or herself is not important. What is important? Their art. So if you think about it, go back into Klill, and we talked about Wagner in his book about Jewishness in music. He's more interested in the artist, not their art. Oscar Wilde says, Who cares about the artist? The art is what's important. Another contemporary example for you, think about Hollywood director Roman Polanski. Now, he's been charged as being a rapist. Is his work still good, even if he is perhaps a bad person himself? Something to think about. The third principle is that there is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. Well, this means that books should be considered for their beauty of their writing style, not their actual message. Okay. Now, something to think about, the novel Dorian Gray was censored as being immoral and indecent. Okay, and the editors were afraid to publish it, and then they cut out quite a bit of it. Okay, and part of that is because of the homosexual or homoerotic undertones in it. The fourth one that we have to consider is that artists should not let their own ethical views influence their art. Now, we have four interesting things there. Can you think of another famous preface? Come on, think hard. The preface to the second edition of Lyrical Ballads, and that's considered the manifesto to English Romanticism. Similarly, the preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray sums up Oscar Wilde's aesthetic beliefs. So then we need a little plot summary. Okay, I'm going to attach a YouTube link also. It's animated. It's quite fast, but it explains everything. Perhaps you can pause it and just look at the pictures, okay? The characters talk in cartoon bubbles and you can see what they're thinking. I think it explains it quite well, but let's have a go here. So we start with painter Basil Howard, and he thinks Dorian Gray is beautiful, so he paints his portrait, which is also beautiful. Dorian realizes that the portrait will remain beautiful, but he himself will lose his beauty as he gets older. He's very disturbed by this, and he makes a pact with the devil when he says that he wishes the picture would age while he himself remains forever young. Little side note, we also talked about William Wordsworth's poetry, the Lucy poems. Remember, Forever Young? If you capture somebody in poetry or in a portrait, they will remain that way. So Dorian also says that he will kill himself when his youth fades. Now there, you have another connection. Can you think of a poem that expresses this sentiment? No. If that happens, I want to die. Anything like that? Well, in The Rainbow, remember that? Wordsworth says, I liked rainbows when I was a child. I like rainbows now. I really hope I like rainbows when I get older, or let me die. Okay, so it's kind of the same thing here. So Dorian Gray and Lord Henry become friends, and Lord Henry corrupts the beautiful young man. He introduces him to a life of vice and sensual pleasures. Okay, it's implied here that Lord Henry introduces Dorian Gray to the pleasures of hedonism. Okay, hedonism, the most important thing is to enjoy yourself. And also libertinism. Libertinism is amorality in relationships. Do what you want. Please yourself. It doesn't matter if other people get hurt. So Dorian Gray goes along with this, and he also takes his sensual experiences further into the realm of perversion. So Lord Henry also introduces Dorian Gray to the theater. Dorian Gray falls in love with an actress, Sibylvane, and ends up treating her very badly. And in fact, she kills herself after being rejected by Dorian. Okay, now as Dorian becomes more evil and out of control, he remains young and beautiful. But the portrait, not only does it become older, but uglier. It becomes a mirror for Dorian Gray's soul. Well, Dorian Gray hides the portrait. And then one day he shows it to Basil. And Basil, of course, is horrified. This is 18 years later, and the portrait is terrible and ugly and deformed, while Dorian still remains as beautiful as the day the portrait was painted. Basil is really horrified by this. So what does Dorian do? He kills him so that no one will know the truth. But then Dorian feels remorse and he decides to become a better person. And so he thinks he will destroy the evil portrait. He stabs the portrait. But what happens? Spoiler alert, by stabbing the portrait, he kills himself. And in a flash, the portrait is restored to its original beauty, while Dorian Gray, now dead on the floor, turns into a hideous and ugly old man. Now, the final question, discuss the relationship between truth and beauty. Well, here, remember that Oscar Wilde was a proponent of the aesthetic movement. And then go back to the preface to the picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde says there that art should reveal art and conceal the artist. Okay? So beauty is a thing which cannot be questioned. And the truth is the opposition between good and evil, true and false, moral and immoral. But beauty is a constant. Okay? So consider that the aesthetic movement was based on beauty, not truth. So in the picture of Dorian Gray, there is an almost, your book says, a schizophrenic split between appearance and reality. Now that is also, take a look at how that refers to Oscar Wilde's life, okay? Remember, he got married, but he was actually attracted to younger men. So why did he get married? He got married to hide that fact. Appearances, he's a married man with children. The reality, he's gay, okay? Which for the Victorians was a crime and it was a perversion, okay? So to wind things up, I'll just leave you with something that Oscar Wilde said himself. He said that the three main characters were reflections of himself. Basil Howard is what I think I am. Lord Henry is what the world thinks of me. And Dorian is what I would like to be. Bye-bye.